Jim and Betsy had paid to renovate the kitchen at the First Presbyterian Church. It was a pretty standard-sized kitchen, about the size of one in your house, normal home appliances, cabinetry, countertops. They wanted the kitchen to be updated and to be more functional for the various fellowship activities at the church and for mission groups that they hosted each summer. One of the challenges, though, with their kitchen and fellowship hall is that they were in the basement of the church, so a wall of dirt and rock butted up against one exterior wall of the kitchen, the one that the sink and the faucet were located on. The window above the sink was right at ground level. You had to weed eat in order to be able to see out of the window from the kitchen. And so after the cabinets had been put in, the countertops installed, the tile floor laid, there was one of these massive summer Appalachian thunderstorms. You're familiar with these, where you have massive amounts of water descend in a matter of minutes. The tree blows sideways as the wind whips through. We've, of course, seen the floods and storms in Florida from Hurricane Ian this past week. Those images are vivid in our minds. We're actually sitting under the remnants of Ian right now. It wasn't quite that powerful a storm, but one of those powerful Appalachian thunderstorms nonetheless. And once the storm receded, go into the kitchen and see a puddle of water on the brand new tile floor surrounding the central kitchen island, converting it from an architectural piece to the literal name that it's named for, an island, land surrounded by water. And we tried waterproofing the wall from the inside. We tried, I think we got scammed on this one, injecting something into the soil that could find the crack and would seal it up. But every time there was one of these major thunderstorms, you'd come into the kitchen and splish splosh on the tile in the floor. Once we renovated the entire church building, the contractor brought heavy machinery, jackhammered out the sidewalk that was next to that wall, and excavated 6 feet down and found the crack in the foundation that the water was getting in. It was repaired, it was patched, the dirt was filled back in, a new sidewalk was poured. It was time-consuming, it was costly, but it was the only way to ensure the integrity of this beautifully renovated kitchen. A modern-day parable of Jesus' ancient words. This image of the foundation stone of our life comes at the end of Jesus' Sermon on the Plain in Luke's Gospel. He's been giving examples to those who would be his followers about what a life with God looks like day to day. Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. Give to anyone who asks and expect nothing in return. Treat other people the way you want them to treat you. Don't judge so that you won't be judged. Forgive wrongdoings. Don't point out the flaws in somebody else while ignoring all the ways that you fall short of God's righteousness. This is the foundation upon which a life with God is built. The irony, of course, is that this foundation is in contrast to the building materials that we are often told we need to acquire in order to build a happy and successful life. If somebody slights you or is unkind to you or even hates you, we're told to cut that person out, cut them out of your life, remove them, and hate them back. Work for their downfall. Punish those who do wrong. Work with those who will help to accelerate your career path, or at least associate with those who make you feel better about your own life and your decisions. Never give something away when there's a buck to be made, or at least a favor to curry in return. Don't you know that life is a series of transactions? And so you're a sucker if you're somebody who just gives things away. Make sure the people you hang around with, they meet your expectations for intelligence, education, social status, financial prosperity, political viewpoints, and do not associate with somebody who doesn't meet those expectations. And by no means admit your wrongdoings or your sins. That's going to destroy you. Instead, cover them over with a fine veneer of righteous indignation and sarcasm and biting critique. Hard work, cunning, ingenuity, success, superior performance, accumulating accolades. This is the means of a successful and happy life. But then the storms come, and the flood overtakes its banks. The dark clouds swirl, and you find out you didn't get the promotion, or you've been laid off this time in the latest round of cutback. Lightning strikes, and you find yourself fighting with your spouse constantly about money because you've become house poor, because you just had to have that house in the right neighborhood, in the right social circles, but now you can't keep up with the new car purchases or with the travel plans or with the sports leagues. The wind picks up, the branches crash to the ground. You find out your kid didn't make the varsity squad, they didn't get in the honor society. You look with bitterness at the other parents, the PTA, whose kids get all those awards every single time. You even feel a bit of shame about your own kid. Somebody says something that's obviously wrong on Facebook, and you offer not only an alternative view, but you fill it with venom just so that you make sure you get under their skin. And so the rain pours down, and you can hear no other sounds but the splatter on the ground. Somebody's always prettier, more organized, smarter, more likable, more talented. No matter how hard you try, you're never going to get there. Transactions and comparisons turn out to not be as stable as you've been told. You look at your feet, you realize you're standing in a puddle of water, and it keeps rising. But we got the marble countertops, you say. We used the custom cabinetry. We put in the heated floors. What happened? A foundation of sand. A foundation that cannot withstand the failures, the sins, the sufferings, and the sorrows that come to every human life, whether we want to admit it or not. It doesn't matter how beautiful the life is. If sand is all it is built upon, it crumbles, and we're lost, and we don't know what to do next. We like to think that we are autonomous and we can be free to make our own decisions for our lives. But Jesus tells us today that those who say, Lord, Lord, and still want to make a life of happiness based on their own standard, their own choices, they are actually not free. They are worshiping another God. His way of forgiveness, support, giving without expecting anything in return. That is a freedom that no storm can destroy. Peter Coy wrote an article in the New York Times, the opinion section this week, about recent findings around the midlife crisis. A recent study has confirmed what common wisdom has told us, that midlife is a time when people disproportionately take their own lives, have trouble sleeping, are clinically depressed, spend time thinking about suicide, feel life is not worth living, find it hard to concentrate, forget things, feel overwhelmed in their workplace, suffer from disabling headaches, and become dependent on alcohol. This study was conducted in wealthy nations among people who are successful in their workplace and in their families. And those woes occur for folks who are at the peak of their earning power, don't struggle with any major or chronic illnesses. They live in safe communities. And so some of the researchers speculate that, that this is a result of midlife being a time when a person has to come to terms with their own mortality. Still others think that it's a biological phenomenon. That's just something in the way that we have evolved to have this midlife crisis. Still others think it's a byproduct of living in an affluent society. There's no real clear explanation as to why. It is simply a confirmation that this is a very real life situation. I would say it's the moment that a person finds himself standing in their beautifully renovated kitchen, and they look down and find their feet in a puddle, and the water keeps rising and the storm keeps beating against the house. All the building materials we were told to acquire don't ultimately deliver, and so we're forced to ask ourselves, why have I spent my life this way? So Jesus tells us a different way to build. It isn't about the beautiful visuals. It is about the foundation that's laid. And this foundation, love of enemies, forgiveness, giving with no expectation, withholding judgment, this foundation removes us from the rat race of competition. It is actually freedom from comparison and from keeping ledgers. So when the storms come, when life is hard, we aren't forced to dismay because we weren't forced to outperform the mean the whole time to begin with. This way of loving, forgiveness, compassion, and generosity, this way of Jesus proves to be impenetrable. When the storm comes, the house still stands. Early in my ministry life, I thought it was the pastor's job to make sure that the congregation knew on Sundays what wrong building materials they were making their life out of, and to berate them, to toss them out, and instead build their life on the firm foundation of Christ. And so in one particular sermon, I went after folks with wealth, and I said those who have wealth, they're greedy, they're opportunistic, and they're obsessed with status. I went to the back at the end of the service to shake hands at the door, and Alice approached me. She shook my hand. She said, "Good morning, Andrew. Thank you for your message today. But you might consider that just because someone has money does not mean they are inherently evil." She then proceeded to walk down the front steps, climb into her Mercedes-Benz next to her husband, and drive off from the church. Good, I thought to myself. She needed to hear that. That's what a good preacher does. You disrupt the comfortable. Alice was kind and gracious. She came back the next week. And as I got to know her over the months and years, I found out that several times on a weekday, she would stop by the church. I'd be in my office, have the door closed, but the doors were thin, so I could hear everything she said. And she would come to the church administrator and she would say, "Heather, I'm giving away money. What do we need money for right now?" And she'd add an extra $1,000 to whatever the mission project was. She'd give $1,000 to sponsor 2 youth to go to the Montreat Youth Conference for the summer. As I listened over the months and years when she would come in, I learned that she was dissatisfied with the giving amount that she and her husband agreed on each year for the church. He was kind of stingy, and she wanted to be more generous. So using her cunning and her car keys, Alice would make her way to the church with her checkbook, always coming in about once a quarter. "Heather, I've got my checkbook. What do we need money for now?" She became more and more generous to the church through these acts throughout the year. And I realized in those overheard conversations that I was the one who paid too much attention to the custom cabinetry and the countertops. I was judging, looking for the speck in my neighbor's eye, assuming I would get something in return for being a good pastor for you and for this church. I felt the sand in my toes, the instability of my own life, hypocrisy between what I was saying and what I was living. Alice, however, knew her foundation. She had spent years of her life strengthening and reinforcing the cracks within the foundation. She was a kind, generous, thoughtful, very honest, and funny person. Now, she was a sinner, just like me too. But I'd failed to look beneath the surface of her life. And what I got to see as it was excavated between my office door and where Alice was standing, what I saw excavated beneath the surface of her life was one that was built on the rock of Jesus Christ. Alice died this week. I'm a better pastor because of her. I've been chastened and encouraged to examine my own foundation. And my hope is that in this season of generosity, as we are all considering our financial commitment to the church for the upcoming year, we might see this as an opportunity to discard the advice of all the other contractors who are telling us what we need to get in order to have a meaningful life, and instead begin to trust the words of Jesus, who is the master builder. Let's reinforce the foundation. Let's learn to be generous, forgiving, accepting, and welcoming, to give fully and freely. For this is actually the way we weather the storm.